Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started. I'm sorry about the delay on the refreshments, but coffee is here. Lauren's cutting up some snacks. So if you haven't, please take a moment, help yourself. Please feel free to get up and help yourself while I'm talking as well. So if you don't know me, my name is Rachael Holstege, and I'm the Associate Curator here at FIA. I'd like to thank you all for coming to our Coffee with the Curator program today, and I'd like to thank Baby Coffee for their sponsorship for the refreshments. I want to remind you that this is the last Coffee with the Curator for the season, so the series is going to start back up in October with a slate of exciting topics. But don't fret, there's always something going on at the FIA. So if you don't receive the members magazine, please stop at the front desk. The folks up there would be happy to let you know what is going on. So today, as you all know, we're going to be talking about 20th century masks in the FIA's permanent collection from the Pacific Northwest. So the three masks we're going to be talking about are currently on view in our Truba-Lewan Family Gallery, the Artelli Gallery. You can see them on the screen there. They were made in the late 20th century. We're unsure about the exact date, but they were likely made sometime between the 1960s and 1990s. They were donated to the museum in 2018 from the collection of the late Myron and Barbara Levine. They were a couple that was based in Ann Arbor, and they were avid travelers, and everywhere they went, they would collect some sort of art. And when they passed their heirs, donated their collection to the museum. So they bought these masks here on a couple different trips to Canada. We know for sure from their daughter that the two masks on the outside there were purchased directly from the artists. So we're going to explore these masks, one representing a kingfisher, one a beaver, and one a bee, each deeply rooted in the cultural and spiritual traditions of their makers' communities. So the three artists are from two different indigenous groups that reside on the Pacific Northwest coast, specifically in Canada's Vancouver and Vancouver Island. So you can see that up there, we're all the way down here. The two groups that we're talking about today are just two of the more than 1,200 indigenous groups in the United States and Canada today. Two of the artists, father and son Henry and Stan Hunt, are Kwakwaka'wakw, and Tom Patterson is part of the Nuu Nation. The Kwakwaka'wakw traditionally inhabit the northern Vancouver Island region and the mainland inlets of British Columbia. The Nuu live along the west coast of Vancouver Island. You can see up close up here, you can see the Kwakwaka'wakw and the Nuu, the areas that they're in. They're two distinct nations with unique languages, governance, and traditions, although they share historical, economic, and cultural connections as neighboring coastal peoples of the Wakashan language family. According to a 2016 census, 3,665 people identified as Kwakwaka'wakw. The Kwakwaka'wakw are made up of over 15 different First Nations groups who have a common language and cultural tradition. Historically, there were about 28 independent tribes, but due to colonial impacts, some have merged and we're left with about 15 today. So on the screen here is a map of the different groups all within the Kwakwaka'wakw Nation. The culture is known for their artwork, wood sculptures like masks or totems carved from cedar. They're also known as cultural or expert fishers, hunters, and gamblers. They've traditionally relied on salmon, shellfish, and sea mammals for sustenance, which would make a lot of sense considering they're right along the coast there. One of the commonalities between the Kwakwaka'wakw and the Nuu is that they both participate in what's known as a potlatch ceremony. So potlatch means to give, and it is a ceremonial feast and gift-giving gathering among indigenous groups in this area. Potlatches are social, political, and spiritual events that reinforce status, kinship, and cultural traditions within these groups. So potlatch ceremonies really serve multiple functions. They're social and they're political. Potlatches can be done to mark major life events such as a birth, a marriage, or a death. It can reaffirm leadership within a group and social status. The host is often a chief or noble, and they distribute gifts to the guests, and this showcases their wealth and generosity. And another reason for a potlatch could be to settle disputes and strengthen alliances within groups. Potlatches are used to resolve conflict and reinforce these sort of relationships between the groups. Potlatch ceremonies can also be very spiritual and culturally significant, and they are often performed to honor ancestors and spirits. Many ceremonies involve storytelling, songs, and performances that connect the lineages of those that are performing. Potlatches are also used to restore balance in the community by redistributing wealth among the community. Instead of one person accumulating a lot of wealth, they give it away and spread it, promoting generosity within the community. So this is an image here from 1897, and this is the beginnings of a potlatch. So it's a little bit hard to see, but over here you can see all sorts of canoes and boats that are filling the entire beach. So people would come from all over, different Kwakwaka'wakw would come along the coast to come to a potlatch, not necessarily put on by their distinct group. And then you can see all these white things here. Those are sacks of flour. So at this particular potlatch, they gave away flour. So they were always very useful things that people need and that would help them. So in the 1800s, they would give items like flour, animal furs, hides, blankets, canoes, oils, and food. In the later in the 1980s and 1990s, this is a more contemporary image. They would give items like bracelets, flour, sugar, baskets, and small wooden furniture. In the 2000s, they continue with practical items like towels, fabric, laundry baskets, and again, flour, sugar, coffee, those necessities that people always need. So masks are a very large part of the ceremony. Participants wear intricately carved masks to embody spirits and mythical beings as they dance. Dance is one of the most important aspects of the ceremony. So I found a really nice 90-second video from a Kwakwaka'wakw filmmaker, Barbara Kramer, and it's just kind of give us an insight into what a contemporary potlatch looks like and sort of the function of what the masks would be.
My people, the Kwakwaka'wakw, have been guided by our ancestors. Our stories of origin are based on our first ancestors. Ceremonial masks tell of our beginning and share our identity and where we come from.
A First Nations group is gathered in a high-ceilinged wood big house with a sand floor. Dancers wear straw hair and tree-like costumes with ornate carved ceremonial masks depicting animal totems. They perform stories as others promote women. In an adobe kitchen, men and women prepare fish and crab. Later, it is served to the crowd as the performances continue. Tables are laid out with soup, bread, and a variety of dishes.
When one's heart is glad, he gives away gifts. It was given to us by our Creator, our way of doing things, of who we are. The potlatch was given to us as a way of expressing joy. Everyone on earth is given something. This was given to us. Today, most potlatches are held as memorials for loved ones. Mourning songs are sung to shake off the sadness, wipe away tears, and set the spirit free.
Eagles soar across a cloudy sky.
My people, the Kwakwaka'wakw,
So potlatch ceremonies have been happening for thousands of years, as long as these cultures have existed, far between European contact in North America. However, in 1884, under what is known as the Indian Act in Canada, the Canadian government banned potlatch ceremonies following years of deliberate suppression of these cultures. Their ceremonial regalia were confiscated and sold by the Canadian government to museums and private collections around the world. not the ones that we're going to be talking about, just so you know. So the Indian Act, it was first introduced in 1876, and it still exists today as a living document within the Canadian government. So the Act initially attempted to generalize a vast and varied population of First Nations people through Canada and assimilate them into non-Indigenous societies. It forbade First Nations peoples and communities from expressing their identities through governance and suppression of culture. So the Act replaced traditional structures of government with what is called band council elections. So normally these communities have hereditary chiefs. So this is a role that's passed down between families. They acquire power through the descent rather than election. So even to this day, the Canadian government under this act does not recognize hereditary chiefs as formal leaders within these nations. So it is still technically band councils, although many have these hereditary chiefs that are still ruling, though they don't have the political governance that they should. And until 1951, women were excluded from these band council politics. So the act also made it illegal for First Nation peoples to practice religious ceremonies and various cultural gatherings. In 1885, as we know, the potlatch was banned. And in 1895, any festival, dance, or any other type of ceremony, including powwows and sun dances, were also banned. So another amendment in 1914, outlawed dancing off reserve, and in 1925, dancing was outlawed entirely. So people, of course, still held ceremonies, and they danced, but in secret. Oftentimes, though, they were found and they were arrested. Many were taken to work camps just for dancing. In 1921, there was a famous potlatch held, and several dozen people were arrested. All of the masks and regalia were confiscated by the government, and the image on the screen there are some masks that were taken from this potlatch. In 1927, the act made it illegal for First Nations people and communities to solicit funds for the pursuit of a land claim, and subsequent amendments required First Nation children to attend industrial or residential schools. As some of you may know, this dark legacy of residential schools in Canada has really affected the Indigenous communities across the country, as well as intergenerationally. So the period following World War II involved a lot of societal introspection in Canada, as well as all over. And this led to a reconsideration of these more restrictive and oppressive measures imposed by the Indian Act. So a new and revised Indian Act was enacted in June of 1951, and the resulting overhaul removed some of the most offensive and political and cultural and religious restrictions. For example, bans on potlatch ceremonies and Sundance were removed. And for First Nations women, this act also meant that they were now able to vote in band council elections. Of course, these changes did not fix everything that the Indian Act sought to get rid of 75 years before. Indigenous people were still unable to vote, and the qualifications for Indigenous status were incredibly discriminatory. And over the next 75 years and to today, the Canadian government continues to use the Indian Act to regulate Indigenous communities. Attempts have been made to repeal this act, but so far it's been unsuccessful. So in 1951, when the potlatch ban was lifted, it took years and years for people to start feeling more comfortable enough to perform these ceremonies without fearing repercussions. There was also the issue of all of the masks and regalia, for the most part, had been destroyed. Some of them had been taken and looted and given to museums, but for the most part, they were destroyed. So sort of trying to rebuild this culture without having anything to base it on was a very difficult task for men. So in 1974, the Kwakwaka'wakw were able to prove that the government had illegally pressured people to give up their regalia. And the Board of Trustees of the Canadian National Museums Corporation eventually agreed, and the process began for the return of these treasures to their rightful home. As part of the agreement for the return of the paraphernalia, the Kwakwaka'wakw museums two Kwakwaka'wakw museums were constructed to properly house these artifacts, and families within these communities were brought into the planning part of this. So on the screen here, this is one of those cultural centers that were set up after this. And after the most restrictive bans were lifted in 1951, they started to rebuild their culture. Like I said, nearly all the masks had been taken or destroyed by the government. Those in the nation who still remembered and held the history, remembered the ceremonies, many hid some masks to prevent them from being looted. They all had to work together to reintroduce these ceremonies to their people. So one of these incredibly important individuals was a man named Mungo Martin. So Martin was born in Fort Rupert, British Columbia in 1884 to parents of the Kwakiwak Nation. So despite the potlatch ban going into effect the year after he was born, Martin's family still very much kept the culture alive within their community by continuing ceremonies, rituals, songs, and art in secret. It was families like his who really felt like they had to protect the culture despite the possible implications like being arrested. In the early 1950s, Martin recorded approximately 400 songs and oral histories about the Kwakiwak at the Royal British Columbia Museum in Victoria. So he's one of the reasons why so much of their history is known today. Martin was a master carver, and in 1958, he finished the world's tallest totem pole, which stands in Beacon Hill Park in Victoria, Canada. You can see it on the screen there. It's no longer the tallest, but at the time it was. A totem pole is a monumental carved wooden structure that contains imagery that is deeply symbolic, representing family lineage, historical events, myths, or spiritual beings. Totem poles feature stacked figures, so you can see these are all different figures stacked upon one another, representing specific beings, animals, with symbolic meanings. So Martin worked as the head carver at Thunderbird Park in Victoria, British Columbia from 1952 until his death in 1962. So Thunderbird Park was established in 1941 to display a number of totem poles within the Royal British Columbia's museum collection. As head carver, Martin led efforts to restore, replicate, and create totem poles and ceremonial structures. On the left there is an image of Thunderbird Park, and on the right is Mungo Martin actively working on a totem pole. One of Martin's major accomplishments was constructing and opening a traditional big house at Thunderbird Park. And it was later, this is where the first legal potlatch was held in Canada after the ban was lifted. So a big house, which you can see on the screen there with this totem pole in the front, is a traditional cedar house building used for various ceremonies and rituals, such as the potlatch. Martin created this house using traditional techniques, which his family had passed on to him. The design on the outside reflects Kwakiwak mythology, and there's also a totem pole with figures that represent ancestral spirits, supernatural beings, as well as the Martin clan crest. So how does this relate to our masks? Well, Mungo Martin and his wife Sarah, they had a daughter named Helen, and in 1939, Helen married Henry Hunt, who is the creator of one of our masks. So this mask on the right there, and there's Henry Hunt. So Henry Hunt was born in 1923 in Fort Rupert, British Columbia. Early on, he worked as a logger and fisherman before he took up wood carving professionally. In 1954, Hunt began working with his father-in-law, Mungo Martin, as a wood carver at the Royal British Museum's Thunderbird Park. Until his death in 1962, Martin taught Hunt the traditional art of carving, and together the two of them worked together to preserve and restore native art. After Martin's death, Hunt became the master carver at Thunderbird Park. In his free time, while not preserving these totems, Hunt would carve masks for collectors and the art market, like the mask that we have in FIA's collection. So the mask that we have depicts a kingfisher. A kingfisher is a significant bird in the Kwakiwak mythology, art, and clan identities. It's often associated with spiritual beings, hunting skills, as well as transformation. So you can see on the screen there, that is what a kingfisher looks like, and our mask is on the left. In the Kwakiwak mythology, the kingfisher is seen as a link between the sky and the water, representing communication with the spirit world. Because of its ability to swiftly dive into water and catch fish, the kingfisher is admired for its hunting skills and patience. In some Kwakiwak legends, the kingfisher is associated with shamans or beings who can transform between humans and birds. So all in all, this type of bird is very significant to this culture. So this mask, and like most masks and most wooden carvings from this area, are carved from pieces of red cedar. So this is for a variety of reasons. The first is that in the Pacific Northwest, the red cedar tree is incredibly common, meaning that it's readily available. It also has a soft grain and a soft texture, a straight grain and a soft texture, making it easy to carve and shape, allowing for intricate designs and detailed features within the masks. And despite it being easy to carve, red cedar is incredibly durable. So it's capable of withstanding the rigors of being used in ceremony, worn, as well as being stored when not being used. So in addition to these practical reasons, red cedar also holds deep cultural and spiritual significance for many indigenous communities, representing life, strength, and of course a connection to the natural world. So I'm just going to kind of talk briefly about the process of creating these masks. So it's highly skilled, spiritual, and artistic process that involves careful selection of materials, traditional carving techniques, and meaningful painting. So the first step of this, of course, is selecting the wood. As we heard, it is likely going to be of red cedar. So red cedar is often harvested ceremonially, with prayers and offerings being given in respect of the tree. The log is then cut into manageable pieces, and the carver chooses a section with the right grain and minimal knots to ensure that there's durability. So once they have the right piece, they would sketch on an initial design onto the wood, then use tools such as axes, knives, to carve the basic shape. So on the left, you can see here Mungo Martin working on a very large totem pole. So you can see he's drawn out sort of the rough shape of it, and then he's going in with these more precise tools to carve into it. So finer tools like chisels and knives would then be used to carve the really tiny and intricate details like facial features, feathers, and teeth. The inside of the mask is then also hollowed out and smoothed to make it lightweight and comfortable for the dancer. If it is produced for ceremonial reasons. Today, a lot of artists will create masks that aren't meant to be worn, so they're created out of a single piece of wood just for display. So once it's ready to be painted, traditional colors are used: red, black, white, green, and blue. The colors are created with natural pigments and minerals, and paint is applied in bold patterns and designs to reflect the natural beings represented. Some masks are then further decorated with additions of hair, like animal fur or cedar bark, feathers, shell inlays, and fabric to enhance their visual impact. Lastly, if a mask is going to then be used in a ceremony, it's often blessed by an elder or chief. Some masks are even awakened through a ceremony where a dancer wears it for the first time, bringing life into the spirit. So unlike most of Henry Hunt's masks that are carved or were carved for decorative purposes and out of a solid block of wood, meaning they would solely be used for decoration, couldn't be worn, this mask is hollow and has eye holes, meaning it was likely worn in a ceremony or was produced for that reason. And it's nice with these masks in the gallery. They're in cases that you can kind of go around so you can kind of see the back of these to see how they would have functioned. So the mask features a human face with a kingfisher bird atop the head. The face has been carved and painted to look like the features of the bird, connecting man and animal. It's not meant to look exactly like the bird, but rather capture its essence and its spirit. The colors are created with natural pigments and minerals like charcoal for the black, red ochre for the red, and the green blue is from copper minerals like malachite or azurite. These pigments would be ground together and combined with something like salmon roe, animal fat, tree sap, or water to create a paint-like pigment. So when used in a ceremony, the dancer would wear this mask and dance in quick darting motions, imitating a kingfisher diving for a fish. The dance would be accompanied by drumming and singing, as the dancer tells a story of transformation or guidance. The dancer would also be dressed in traditional regalia And what they would be wearing would enhance the bird's movements and symbolism. So likely it might have feathers, so that when they're dancing, it's really creating this whole experience. So Henry Hunt and his wife had 5 children, all of whom ended up becoming artists. Henry Jr., Shirley, Tony, Richard, and Stan. His youngest 3 sons, Tony, Richard, and Stan, he trained in the art of traditional carving. So when Henry retired as master carver from Thunderbird Park, his son Richard took over, and he held that role for 7 years. But we're not going to talk about Richard. We're going to talk about Stan, the youngest son. He carved this mask on the left that you see there. Stan was born in 1954 in British Columbia. As you heard, Stan was born into a family of master carvers. And when he was young, he told his father he wanted to be a carver. His father told him that before he could learn to carve, he had to make his own tools. And after many years of perfecting his tools, Stan finally was able to begin carving in the traditional way, with predominantly traditional subjects. Stan today works from his studio in Fort Rupert on Vancouver Island, where he not only creates art, but also mentors the next generation in these traditional carving methods. His works are featured in private collections, public spheres, and museums like ours. In 2012, he carved a 42-foot totem pole in Plaza Canada in Buenos Aires, Argentina. This actually replaced an earlier totem pole that had deteriorated that his father and grandfather had installed in 1962. So the new pole, when he installed it, he included his family crests in there to pay homage to his father and his grandfather. So this is the mask in the FIA's collection, and it represents a beaver. In Kwakiutl culture, beavers are known for their persistence and skill in building lodges and dams, making them a symbol of hard work, resilience, and determination. The beaver's ability to shape the landscape aligns with the group's belief in transformation and balance between land and water. In some legends, the beaver had human-like abilities and interacts with other supernatural beings in the spirit world. So this mask, like the last, is carved from pieces of red cedar. The large prominent teeth that you see mimic that of a beaver, and the nose has been carved in a very similar rodent-like way. The horn-like piece up here, I think, is supposed to symbolize their tail. I think it looks like that. And then there's also been fiber. It's a little hard to see, but that's been added to mimic the fur of a beaver. A mask like this would have been worn at a potlatch ceremony, and a dancer would wear it with a similar regalia. Wearing the beaver mask, they would move in low, deliberate steps, imitating the beaver's movement on land. And drummers and singers would accompany the dance, using rattles or log drums to create rhythms that reflect the sound of beavers gnawing on wood. So it was a whole experience, visual, auditory of what you're seeing in these ceremonies. So the last mask we're going to be talking about is by artist Tom Patterson. So Patterson was born in Victoria, British Columbia, and is a member of the Nuu Nation of Vancouver Island. So here's a map of the Nuu territories. In 2014, there were 4,606 registered Nuu individuals, according to a government survey. As of 2016, they've reported that there are 4,310 people identifying, so it has come down. The Nuu are indigenous people of the Pacific Northwest coast, as we know, and their name means all along the mountains and sea, which reflects their deep connection to both land and ocean, and quite literally, they're all along mountain and sea. They are a larger part of the Wakashan language family, and they consist of about 14 related nations. Traditionally, they were skilled whalers, fishers, and carvers, with a rich cultural center around the ocean. Their social structure included complex systems of ranks, potlatch ceremonies, and oral traditions. So Tom Patterson was born in 1962 in British Columbia. He moved with his family to the West Coast. And early on in his life, he credits his parents for his interest in their heritage, as they passed along their traditions to him at a very young age. He first was inspired to carve in 1977 when he took an 8-week carving course at a gallery, and he studied under Tony Hunt, which is one of the Hunt sons. He continued to study with Tony and the master carvers who shared their knowledge with him. And although he is of New descent, his artwork is very strong in the Kwakiwak style, so it's very similar to these other masks. And because these cultures overlap very much, you see this in much of the artwork. So today, Patterson continues to create art that embodies the rich cultural traditions of the New people, ensuring that their stories and artistries endure for future generations. So the mask that we have depicts a bee. The bee symbolizes a strong sense of community, honesty, and happiness. During celebrations, dancers would wear the bee masks and engage with the participants by playfully stinging them with pointed sticks. This was kind of a fun thing, not as a threat, but more of an amusing thing. So those that were then stung were often given like small gifts, which is then part of the community's values of reciprocity and goodwill. Well, bees don't really hold the same mythological roles as like the beaver or the kingfisher or ravens or bears. They do appear in many stories within the cultures, especially those related to resourcefulness, protection, and transformation. There are accounts of bees being associated with stinging or punishment in New stories. Sometimes they're used as a deterrent or protector against wrongdoings. For example, in some oral tradition, bees might be unleashed by a supernatural being to attack a wrongdoer or someone who breaks a taboo. They are often seen as a symbol of swift justice or natural defense. So the mask that we have features a striped stinger that goes down the center there. And that really is the giveaway that it's a bee motif there. It has yellow and black stripes that mimics the stingers that runs along the top of the head through the nose and chin. The spikes radiate around the face, and it gives the mask a prickly defensive sort of energy. In addition, there is this cedar bark fringe that has been added, and it is often added in traditional regalia. And so the movement of it would help mimic sort of the movement of a bee. And of course, we have these scalloped pieces hanging down here that sort of echo the segmented body of a bee or possibly their wings. And these would also move during the dance, so the mask would become very animated. So those are our 3 masks that we're going to talk about. I hope that this deep dive into the artistry, history, and cultural significance of these masks gave you not only a better understanding of the works themselves, but of the Kwakiwak and Nuchinu people. The masks are more than just objects, as we've heard. They're vessels of story, resilience, identity, and ceremony, each carrying generations of knowledge and spirit. As we reflect on this beauty and complexity of these pieces, let's also remember to honor the communities that continue to preserve and revitalize these cultures despite the many challenges they've faced. So thank you all again for being here, and I hope to see you in October when our series resumes. Until then, please enjoy the gallery. You can go see these on view right now and exploring all the things that the FIA has to offer.